So I am going to talk about being healthy on a vegan diet. So I want to just begin by telling you just very briefly about my journey as a vegan RD. And so I've been a registered dietitian for over 40 years. And I've been vegan for over 35 years. And I can tell you, when I began, the adequacy of vegan diets was very much in question. I learned two things in university about vegetarian and vegan diets. I learned, number one, that vegetarian diets are risky, especially for pregnant women and children, and vegan diets are downright dangerous for everyone. It was actually a part of the chapter on fad diets in my textbook. And when I made the decision to become vegan, I decided that I would spend the rest of my career trying to change that narrative. And I have not been alone in doing that, but I can tell you it was a fairly small handful of people that were trying to do that. And I am overjoyed to say that the narrative has changed. And I would just like to read you this is from the 2016 position statement of the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. Appropriately planned vegetarian diets, including total vegetarian or vegan diets, are healthful, nutritionally adequate, and may provide health benefits in the prevention and treatment of certain diseases. Well-planned vegetarian diets are appropriate for individuals during all stages of the life cycle, including pregnancy, lactation, infancy, childhood, adolescence, and for athletes. We have come a long ways. This is what we know. We know that well-planned diets can meet nutritional requirements, whether they're vegan or omnivorous. But vegan diets score highest in diet quality measures, like the Healthy Eating Index. They contain the least total and saturated fat, the least amount of sugar, fried foods, sodium, and ultra-processed or LUPF foods, and the most fiber, phytochemicals, vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, and seeds. But we also must admit that some vegan diets are more healthful than others. Ensuring adequacy is about choosing high-quality food. It's about ensuring a sufficient quantity of food and about selecting a wide variety of food and adding in fortified foods or nutritional supplements if they're required. So being healthy on a vegan diet is really about 4 dietary goals. Number 1, to ensure the most healthful sources of macronutrients. Number 2, sufficient micronutrients. Number 3, we want to maximize our intake of protective dietary components. And number 4, to minimize our intake of pathogenic or harmful dietary components. So goal number 1, ensure the most healthful sources of macronutrients. So as you're probably well aware, macronutrients are the big nutrients, the nutrients we need in large amounts to provide us with energy and to support growth, development, metabolism, and all of our body systems. And there are 3 of them: protein, carbohydrate, and fat. And macronutrients drive many of today's most pressing nutrition controversies. Our 3 biggest dietary trends, plant-based, paleo, and keto, are essentially defined by macronutrients. Plant-based is a carbohydrate-rich protocol, paleo is protein-dominant, and keto is fueled by fat. But what many people don't realize is that the proportion of each macronutrients matters far less than the sources of those macronutrients. When macronutrients come from whole plant foods, they're rich in protective dietary components like fiber and antioxidants and phytochemicals, and they are consistently protective to health. When macronutrients come from ultra-processed foods or UPF foods or animal products, they're more commonly associated with adverse health impacts. So I'd like to go through each of the macronutrients, and we'll begin with protein. So the big question that everybody gets asked when they become plant-based or vegan is, where do you get your protein? So can we actually get enough protein and essential amino acids from plants? And the answer is absolutely. All plants, every single one of them, provide all 20 amino acids, including all 9 essential amino acids. Even the largest mammals on the planet manage to get enough protein and essential amino acids from plants to build big muscles, and people can too. This is Mr. Universe, Barney Duplessis. He's 100% vegan. So how much protein do people actually need? Well, in terms of grams of protein per kilogram per day, we need, and a kilogram is 2.2 pounds, we need about 1.5 to 1.2 during our first year of life, about 1 during childhood, about 0.85 during our teenage years, and about 0.8 as adults. We need more during pregnancy and lactation. And if we look at the grams of day that what we would need, that most people need, and the grams per day are based on the reference body weight in red. Of course, that would have to be adjusted based on our own body weight. But what's really important to know is that this is based on healthy body weight, not actual body weight. So if you weigh 250 pounds and your healthy weight is 190, you base your protein requirements on 190, not 250. So what do we need? Well, about 10 grams during infancy, about 13 to 34 during childhood, of course more as we get older, and then about 46 to 56 during our adult years, and more during pregnancy and lactation. So one question that sometimes gets asked is, do vegans need more protein than omnivores? And there is no separate RDA for vegans, but plant foods do contain fiber and other dietary components like trypsin inhibitors and tannins and so on, phytates, and that can inhibit the absorption of protein or protein digestibility. And so for those eating high fiber, whole food, plant-based diets, some experts say maybe we should add 10% to compensate for the losses, what we lose in our stools because of the fiber and other anti-nutrients in plant foods. Now, this is not thought to be necessary for people that regularly eat lower fiber plant foods like tofu and soy milk and seitan and maybe veggie meats and nut and seed butters and so forth. Protein digestibility, and this, I think it's important to understand this too. Protein digestibility in foods that are either lower in fiber or have been blended tend to be actually very similar to animal products. So we see a protein digestibility of about 98% from seitan, 95% from soy protein isolate, 95 from peanut butter, 93 from tofu, 92 from whole wheat bread. It's a little higher from white bread. That is very similar to the protein digestibility from animal foods that range from about 94 to 97%. But as you can see, the very whole grains and legumes have about a 10% lower digestibility. Some legumes, it can be even a little bit more than that. But protein digestibility can be increased by breaking down fiber, by grinding, blending, or other food processing techniques. So you'll absorb more protein from hummus than from whole chickpeas, right? Or from a smoothie than the components that you're putting into the smoothie. You can increase protein digestibility by removing or reducing fiber, as you know, in making pasta or other whole grain products, by reducing or eliminating trypsin inhibitors by cooking, So of course we cook grains, we cook legumes, and that will, sometimes we sprout them, but even sprouting will reduce or increase digestibility. And then reducing phytates by soaking, sprouting, fermenting, or leavening. Now, athletes need more protein. Most sports and health authorities will say 1.2 to 2 instead of 0.8. But that's not that difficult for them to achieve because they're eating so many calories. Okay, so with high caloric intakes, it's very easy to get enough protein. And a lot of people think that you've got to have meat to get that kind of protein you need for building muscles. Well, to be honest with you, we've got quite a few studies that have shown that plant-based athletes can meet protein needs by just getting a variety of plant foods and eating sufficient calories. And the studies show that plant and animal protein sources are equally effective in promoting muscle mass and strength. And this guy here, his name is Nimene Delgado, and he has been vegetarian from birth, vegan since 2015. He's never eaten meat in his life, and he looks like he's doing okay. He's pretty oppressed, let me just say. But older adults are another story. So there's no separate RDA for seniors in North America, but there are in many countries like Australia, Germany. All the Nordic countries have separate RDAs for seniors. And the consensus is building that seniors actually need 1 to 1.2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. And the thinking is that this extra protein will help to reduce sarcopenia and frailty, preserve mobility and function, improve recovery from illness, and delay bone loss. And so there's quite a big emphasis on seniors getting more protein. And the challenge for seniors is they eat fewer calories. And so they're needing more with fewer calories, which means they need to eat more protein-dense diets. They need to focus a little more on legumes and other protein-rich foods than younger people might. And I can tell you in my clinical experience, I've seen quite a number of whole food plant-based, especially women, who are consuming about 35 to 45 grams of protein per day. And that almost always falls short of that 1 to 1.2 gram recommendation. And most of the women that I see are not concerned about protein because in the plant-based community, the mantra is, if you get enough calories from a variety of foods, you get enough protein. And to be honest, that's almost always true, except with older women. We see them not getting enough calories. And so when they don't get enough calories, sometimes they also don't get enough protein. And what happens is we see things like skin fragility, hair loss, brittle nails, muscle weakness, fatigue, inability to fight infection, poor wound healing, long recovery times, mood changes, and increased rate of bone loss as well. And then I want to share with you this testimony I have from a client who had low protein intakes. And she wrote this little testimony so that I could use it with her permission. And here's what she said. I was frustrated by many symptoms after following a whole food plant-based diet for some time. I wondered if I was getting enough protein, but the plant-based doctors I was following told me protein was not the issue. Brenda Davis assessed my diet and suggested increasing my protein intake from about 35 to 40 grams a day to about 60 to 70 grams a day. I feel better and look better. My skin has vastly improved on increased protein. No Band-Aids, no bleeding, more opaque, and much less bruising. My abdomen is receding. These are issues I've dealt with since my mid-70s, and now at 83 years of age, they're clearing up. I think it's really important that older adults know that even on healthy, whole food, plant-based diets, protein can fall short, and increasing protein intake can be very helpful. And I want to show you how easy it is to take a person from 41 grams of protein to 72. And you can see here, she's having a cup of oatmeal, a cup of almond milk, a banana, and flax seeds for breakfast, a salad with a non-fat dressing, whole grain bread, hummus with some tomatoes on top and an orange for lunch, and a sweet potato with a black bean and corn filling, and about a half a cup of black beans in that, a half of an avocado, a cup of broccoli, and some chia pudding with blueberry sauce for dessert. So you can see up here, the red text are things that I substituted in her diet, and the purple text are additions. And you can see there's only 2 additions I made. The substitutions are simple. I substituted almond milk for soy milk in both breakfast and in the chia pudding. I substituted the non-fat dressing for a tahini hemp seed dressing. I added only 1 tablespoon of hemp seeds at breakfast and 1/3 of a cup of tofu cubes for her lunch. And by doing that, I added about 10 grams of protein from the soy milk, 15 from the tofu, and about 6 from mostly from the hemp seeds in the dressing and on the cereal. And that took her from 41 to 72 grams of protein. Simple job. So where do we get protein in plant foods? Well, we get about 15 to 30 grams of protein in a cup of legumes, about a half a cup of tofu or 3 ounces of veggie meat. That's about the same as what you'd get from 3 ounces of meat, poultry, or fish. You get about somewhere 6 to 13 from a 1/4 cup of nuts or seeds or a cup of cooked grains. And that's about the same as what you get from 2 large eggs, a cup of milk, or an ounce of cheese. So getting enough protein is really about including at least 1 protein-rich choice at each meal. And it can be beans, lentils, split peas, tofu, tempeh, edamame, seitan, veggie meat, seeds, nuts, all of those work. You want to include some lower protein choices in the mix to maximize protein digestibility. So tofu, soy milk, peanut butter, seitan, those all work. And the other thing that makes such a difference, and I find this especially as we get older or for young children, is to choose a milk that has a little more protein, like a soy or a pea milk as opposed to an almond milk. So can plant-based meat alternatives be part of a healthy vegan diet? And my answer is yes. They can be part of a healthy diet. They provide concentrated, highly digestible protein and can be especially useful for those with higher protein requirements, like athletes. There was a recent review from Matt Negra, he's from Canada, that showed that these veggie meats actually have a better, sort of a more heart-healthy nutrition profile than meat. However, of course, they're often very highly processed. There's a lot of variability in their quality and their content of saturated fat and salt. So you want to compare labels. You want to just be selective and choose those that are more whole food based more often, like quinoa black bean burgers. I make my own out of, just using beets and lentils and all sorts of healthy foods, and they're delicious. So you can do that ideally. And remember, the most healthful protein choices are the least processed choices, like beans, lentils, tofu, nuts, and seeds. These should be our staples. Moving on to carbohydrates. So what are the healthiest carbohydrate sources? No question, whole plant foods. When it comes to carbohydrates, popular opinions suggest carbohydrates are bad news and people should minimize their intake. This is, to me, a very big mistake. The healthiest foods on the planet get most of their calories from carbohydrates. All plant foods, with the exception of nuts and seeds, are about 60 to 90% of calories from carbohydrates. The healthfulness of carbohydrate is determined by the quality of that carbohydrate. High-quality carbohydrates are carbohydrates that are intrinsic to whole plant foods. They're loaded with protective compounds such as fiber and prebiotics and phytochemicals and antioxidants, and of course, all plant foods, all whole plant foods fall into that category. Low quality carbohydrates, by contrast, are carbohydrates that have essentially been stripped of their protective components by food processing techniques. And good examples are all of these ultra-processed foods that make up the majority of our diets, like sugar-sweetened beverages and white flour products and white rice and, all of these kinds of foods. Refined carbohydrates increase our risk of overeating and obesity, metabolic-associated fatty liver disease, insulin resistance and diabetes, high triglycerides, and heart disease. And unfortunately, most of the carbohydrates consumed, especially in North America, are refined. Probably close to 90% of them are refined. And refined sugar is bad news. There was actually an umbrella review in 2023 of 8,600 studies, 73 meta-analyses that showed added sugars have a significant harmful association with 18 endocrine and metabolic disorders, 10 cardiovascular outcomes, 7 cancer outcomes, and 10 other outcomes. And what did the authors recommend? That people reduce free sugars or added sugars to less than 25 grams or 6 teaspoons a day. And you might say, 6 teaspoons? That's a lot of sugar. Just wait. Limit consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages to not more than 1 per week. I would say get rid of them completely, but still. If you look at how much sugar is in food, 1 serving of a sweet food, like a 12-ounce can of soda, a large flavored coffee, 1 cup of fruit yogurt, whether it's dairy or soy, a large cinnamon bun, provides about twice as much sugar as that maximum, about 12 teaspoons a day in many cases. The flavored coffee can have up to 18 teaspoons of sugar. It is shocking. Even things we don't think of as being major sugar sources, like energy bars and barbecue sauce and instant oatmeal, can get you pretty close to the 6 teaspoons. And daily average adult intakes are 17 teaspoons a day. It's about 21 for teenagers. So it's just unbelievable. And if you want to see how much sugar is in a food, if you're looking at the grams of added sugar, 4 grams of added sugar equals 1 teaspoon of sugar. So it's a nice way to see how many teaspoons are there. And half, not quite half, but almost half of all the sugar that Americans eat come in the form of liquid sugar or sweet beverages. Another 31% are from sweets and snacks, like baked goods and so forth. So just removing those 2 things, you'd be cutting out a lot of sugar. And it's a similar story for refined starches. So if you look at turning wheat into white flour, you're essentially removing the bran and the germ and just eating the endosperm. And in that process, you lose 80 to 90% of the fiber, 70 to 80% of the vitamins and minerals, and 95% of the protective phytochemicals. And then, of course, no one eats a bowl of white flour. What do they do before they eat the white flour? Well, they add fat and sugar and salt and food additives, and then they eat the white flour. And therein lies the problem. Not only have we removed almost everything of value to human health, but we've added a bunch of components that we know are associated with increased risk of disease. So it's like a double whammy. But of course, whole grains are healthy foods. There was a 2016 meta-analysis of 45 studies that reported a reduced risk of mortality for every 3 servings of whole grains. For all-cause mortality, 17% risk reduction. For cardiovascular disease mortality, 22, diabetes, 51, cancer, 15, and respiratory disease, 22%. But all whole grains are not created equal. So a granola bar does not equal a bowl of oatmeal. And a box of Kamut flakes does not equal a Kamut berry salad. Okay? There is a hierarchy of whole grains. And I actually created this hierarchy because I saw so many people saying, I just eat whole grains, but they were not considering the degree of processing of those whole grains. So the hierarchy is to help people understand that degree of processing matters. So intact grains like barley and oat groats and quinoa, and, that's the top of the hierarchy. If you sprout them, it's even better. Cooking them, absolutely fine. Then we cut the grains, then we roll them, then we shred them, then we grind them, then we flake them, then we puff them. And as we go down the hierarchy, we're increasing the surface area of the grain, and we're we're increasing the rate at which those carbohydrates will be absorbed into the bloodstream. We're also exposing those grains to heat and pressure and all of those things which damage nutrients. So we're losing nutrients, we're increasing the impact on blood sugar. And so we want to, as much as possible, stay closer to the top of the hierarchy most of the time. Not all of the time. You can have a slice of bread. So carbohydrate common sense, get your carbohydrates from high fiber whole plant foods, minimize all refined carbohydrates, whether they're starches or sugars, and just avoid sugar-sweetened beverages completely. Moving on to fat. So what are the best and worst sources? Well, plant foods are the primary sources of healthy fats, the mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids, including essential fatty acids. Ultra-processed foods, deep-fried foods, fast foods, and animal products are the primary sources of harmful fats, saturated fats, trans fats, and oxidized fats, so fats that are damaged by heat. So what about whole foods versus fats and oils? Well, high-fat whole plant foods are preferred as the best source of fat because they come with a myriad of protective dietary components, like the fiber and the antioxidants. By contrast, fats and oils are more concentrated in calories, they have fewer nutrients, and they have no fiber. So we want to, if you use them, we want to use them in as small amounts as possible. We need to optimize omega-3s. So plant foods contain alpha-linolenic acid, and it's less biologically active than the long-chain omega-3s, EPA and DHA. So icosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid, which people get usually from fish in their diet, right? And so we have to rely on, or many vegans rely on, conversion of ALA to these long-chain active omega-3s. And conversion is not very efficient, to say the least. And so to optimize omega-3 fatty acid status, I would suggest doubling the acceptable intake for ALA, which means doubling that 1.1 grams for women and 1.6 for men. So you'd be looking at about 2 to 3 grams of ALA a day, but you can also take a direct source of EPA and DHA, and that's one of the things that I do. I think it's a reasonable choice. So sources of ALA, well, you can see walnuts and almonds, about 2.6 grams. Flax oil, 1 teaspoon, 2.4. You get about 1.5 or a little more grams of ALA from a tablespoon of chia seeds or flax seeds. And then hemp seeds are a reasonable source. Green leafy vegetables, about half the fat is omega-3. The only problem is they hardly have any fat. So you have to eat a truckload of them to get enough. I think you'd have to eat about 20 cups to get your 2 grams. So do we really need preformed EPA and DHA? We don't really know for sure. We do know, however, that the EPA and DHA in the blood, tissue, and breast milk of vegans is about 40 to 70% lower than it is in omnivores. And that these long-chain omega-3s are important for eye health, brain health, the permeability, flexibility of cell membranes. So it just, to me, it makes sense to consider taking an omega-3, long-chain omega-3 supplement. And the good news is that fish get their long-chain omega-3s from little plants that grow in the ocean, and so can we. We just culture it. It's free of environmental contaminants. It's a clean, safe source. So, and I think it is really wise for pregnant and lactating women and those that don't convert very well, like people with hypertension or diabetes, older individuals. Generally, about 200 to 300 milligrams per day is considered sufficient. So goal number 2 is to ensure sufficient micronutrients. And here we're talking about vitamins and minerals. And these are nutrients needed in tiny amounts, either milligrams or micrograms per day. They're necessary for our body function. There are 13 vitamins and 15 minerals that we know of that are essential to health. There may be more. And when you think about common vitamin and mineral shortfalls, some of the nutrients, the shortfalls are more common in Western diets, like folate, vitamin C, E, K, magnesium, and potassium. And some are more common in plant-based diets, like B12, vitamin D, calcium, iron, zinc, iodine, for sure. So we're going to look quickly at these nutrients. So let's begin with calcium. And how much do we need? Well, the RDA, and some people will argue whether or not we really need that much, is about 7 to 1,300 milligrams for kids, 1,000 for adults, and that's for women up to 50 and men up to 70. Then for women over 50 or men over 70, it's 1,200 milligrams. So how can we get enough calcium without dairy products? Well, we need to learn, when you're in school, you learn that there's one food with calcium, and that's dairy products, right? That there's so much emphasis on eating dairy for calcium. But in fact, there are lots of other foods that do provide calcium, like low oxalate greens, nuts and seeds like chia seeds, almonds, tahini, legumes like black and white beans, tofu, molasses, figs, oranges even have a fair bit of calcium. So the other thing we can do is to select calcium-fortified non-dairy milks and other foods with added calcium to boost our intake. So calcium-fortified milks provide about 300 milligrams of calcium per cup, and tofu made with calcium provides about 1 to 300 milligrams per half cup. So 1 to 2 servings of the milk or the tofu will usually help us to meet our RDA for calcium. So what about absorption? I can remember the dairy industry taking up an ad in a magazine saying, yeah, it's true. Plant foods have calcium, but it's not bioavailable. So you can't get any from it. And so for a long time, people thought, well, it's just not bioavailable from plants. But in fact, dairy products, you get about 32 to 34% of the calcium in dairy products. You get about the same from tofu with calcium or soy milk. You actually get more, about 40 to 70%, from low oxalate greens like broccoli, kale, Chinese greens, turnip greens, mustard greens, or from fortified foods. And then you get just over the 20% from legumes and sweet potatoes. You get the least from from high oxalate greens and rhubarb. So foods with a lot of oxalates like spinach, beet greens, and Swiss chard. You're only maybe going to get 5% of the calcium that's there. It doesn't mean you don't get any. You can't rely on them as being major sources of calcium. And you want to be aware of factors that impact calcium absorption, like excessive oxalates or phytates, too much sodium, high acid load, alcohol, caffeine can also negatively impact calcium absorption. And what positively impacts it is vitamin D. Younger people absorb more, so children absorb a lot more calcium than older people do. During pregnancy, your ability to absorb calcium escalates. And if you distribute your calcium throughout the day, you absorb a lot more. So if you had your whole 1,000 milligrams at breakfast, you'll absorb far less than if you have 300 milligrams per meal, for example. Vitamin D, how much do we need? Well, the RDA is 400 for infants, 600 for 1 to 70-year-olds, and 800 for those over 70. And although vitamin D can be produced by exposure to warm sunshine, hardly any of us get enough from warm sunshine. In fact, there was even a study in Hawaii that showed even people exposed to quite a lot of sunshine weren't making enough vitamin D. And vegans are at greater risk because there are fewer plant sources of vitamin D. So the main sources in the diet are fish, eggs, liver, and mushrooms, and fortified milks, non-dairy or dairy milks. And if you look at the amount in foods, you can see a cup of cow's milk is about 100 IUs. That's about the same for a fortified non-dairy milk. It's about 20 to 50 in a lot of other fortified foods, and you can see it's 15 to about 600 in fish. Fish is about 70 to 600. But the most concentrated source of vitamin D is mushrooms exposed to UV light. So you go into a grocery store, how the heck do you know if your mushrooms have been exposed to UV light, right? Well, guess what? You don't have to, because you can increase the vitamin D in your store-bought mushrooms by exposing them to warm sunlight. And all they need is about 10 to 15 minutes, gills up in the sun. So you just put them on a cookie tray, gills up, and a 3.5-ounce serving will give you over 100% of the RDA, or about the amount found in 8 eggs. It's shocking. And the vitamin D will last about 8 days in the refrigerator when you do that. So this is a potentially fabulous source of vitamin D for vegans. So what about supplements? Well, you can certainly take supplements. 1,000 to 2,000 IUs is recommended for a lot of adults. Some people need to go a little higher to get their levels up. I live in Canada, so we have about probably 8 months where it's like the vitamin D winter kind of thing, where you don't actually produce any vitamin D from sunshine because it's not warm enough. It has to be warm sunshine. So vitamin D3 tends to raise serum levels a little more than D2, but plant-based D3 is really readily available. Vitamin B12, how much do we need? It's about 2.4 micrograms, although some experts and a lot of European countries actually suggest higher amounts. It's a little higher in pregnancy and lactation, a little lower for children. Plant foods are not reliable sources of B12 unless they're fortified. Even foods that people commonly think of as B12 sources, like organic vegetables, seaweed, fermented foods, mushrooms, cannot be relied on as sole sources of B12. And B12 stores can last 2 to 3 years or more in adults, but breastfed babies born to B12 deficient mothers can develop symptoms of B12 deficiency within weeks of birth and irreversible brain damage within months of birth. So it's just, and seniors are at higher risk. 10 to 30% of people over 50 have a diminished ability to cleave B12 off the protein it's bound to in animal products. So even for omnivores who are 50 plus, the Institute of Medicine suggests they can only rely on supplements and fortified foods for their B12, just like vegans. So B12 deficiency increases the risk of dementia and Alzheimer's disease. We don't want to mess with B12. Every plant-based eater or older person should ensure reliable daily sources and monitor their B12 status. So what are reliable sources? Well, supplements, we need 1,000 micrograms, probably twice a week for adults, and possibly more for seniors, 500 to 1,000 micrograms a day. But I would say test your levels, because some seniors end up having really high levels and they just don't need that much. B12 fortified foods are reliable, and for people who are lacto-ovo-vegetarian or omnivorous, then they can rely on animal products if they're under 50 years of age. Iron, we need about 18 milligrams for women because we menstruate, unless we're postmenopausal. Pregnancy and lactation, 27. It goes down to 9 for lactation. Men only need 8, but check this out. Babies need 11, more than a man. Children, it's somewhere 10 to 15 milligrams of iron. And generally, vegans consume as much or more iron. If you look at the research, we actually generally consume more iron than omnivores, but our absorption is lower. But the risk of iron deficiency is not usually higher, except possibly in menstruating women. We do, however, have lower ferritin stores. And the lower ferritin stores, if they're still within the normal range, don't affect how a person feels, don't appear to be a disadvantage when the diet replenishes stores. And they actually may turn out to be an advantage, because higher serum ferritin is associated with an increased risk of chronic diseases like heart disease and diabetes. So how can we ensure sufficient iron on a plant-based diet? Well, we want to select iron-rich foods from each food group. The legume stars are lentils and beans. And of course, lentils being at the very top, they're very high in iron. Nuts and seeds. Seeds are better than nuts, but some nuts are also good sources. And then grains, usually the pseudo grains are a little higher, but wheat and fortified grains are also sources. And then veggies and fruits like peas and string beans and leafy greens and, prune juice, things like that. We want to moderate our intake of iron absorption inhibitors. So you do not want to be sprinkling bran on your food. When you sprinkle bran on your food, you reduce the iron absorption probably 50 to 90%. Polyphenolics, if you drink a cup of tea with your meal, you can decrease iron absorption by up to 90%. Zinc, single nutrient zinc supplements will compromise iron absorption, as will calcium and dairy products. So we want to boost intake of iron absorption enhancers, like foods rich in vitamin C and organic acids, spices like pepper, turmeric, and ginger, allium vegetables like garlic and onions, foods rich in beta-carotene like carrots and sweet potatoes. Zinc, recommended intakes are about 8 to 12 for adults, about 3 to 5 for children. Recommended intakes can be 50% higher in those eating high fiber, high phytate vegan diets, but we do have homeostatic mechanisms that appear to help people adjust and be better able to absorb zinc over time. For children, we really do need to pay attention to zinc because it impacts their ability to grow. And so we want to make sure that we're giving them a varied diet that includes good sources of zinc. And some of the best sources, you can see in red, they have at least 2 milligrams of zinc per serving at zucchini beans and tofu. And then pumpkin seeds and chia seeds, cashews are pretty good too at 1.9. But one of the most surprising sources of zinc is oatmeal, 2.4 milligrams for a cup. So that's pretty impressive. And then, some grains as well. And just to compare it, a 3-ounce serving of beet has about 3.5, and a cup of cow's milk around the 1 milligram of zinc. So how to boost zinc? Well, include zinc-rich foods at each meal. So we're talking about legumes, nuts, seeds. Limit the use of really high phytate foods like wheat bran. Use food preparation techniques that reduce phytates like soaking, sprouting, leavening, fermenting, all that. And ensure sufficient calories. And for children, if there's a question, a good quality multivitamin mineral supplement with zinc can be helpful. Iodine, this a lot of people don't know. Severe iodine deficiency results in cognitive impairment and is the number 1 cause of preventable brain damage in the world, resulting in cretinism. But mild deficiency in pregnant women robs a baby from about 10 to 15 IQ points. And that's just mild deficiency. And that can adversely affect learning ability. So how much iodine do we need? 150 micrograms a day for adults, a little more during pregnancy and lactation, quite a lot during infancy, 110 to 130, and it's around the 100 during childhood up to 13 years of age. So the 150 is 14 years plus. But what I want you to notice is, check this out. The upper limit is 200 micrograms for a 1 to 3-year-old. That is not a lot more than the recommended daily allowance. 300 for 4 to 8-year-olds, and it's at 1,100 for 14 plus. But you'll see why that's important in a minute. There are fewer plant sources of iodine, so vegans are at increased risk unless they're regular seaweed consumers. So iodine sources, amount supplying 150 micrograms, a half a teaspoon of salt, a 1/16 of a teaspoon of talc powder, 2 nori sheets, a half a teaspoon of dulse granules, 6 slices of bread, 1.5 cups of cow's milk, because we use iodine to clean the teats of the cows. That's why it contains iodine. 6 large eggs or 6 ounces of fish. So you can see for plant-based eaters, it's iodized salt and the seaweed that provides the most. So to boost iodine intake, use a supplement, include appropriate amounts of seaweed. And if you're using salt, select iodized salt or iodized sea salt. Now, the thing is to recognize is that if you get 150 micrograms from a 1/16 of a teaspoon of kelp, a teaspoon puts you way over the upper limit, especially for a small child. So if you're using seaweed, you really need to know how much is safe, where you don't exceed the upper limit. Goal number 3 is to maximize protective dietary factors, fiber, pre- and probiotics, phytochemicals, plant enzymes, and antioxidants. Fiber is something that we know promotes regularity, but it also is critical to our microbiome. It increases satiety, reduces cravings, reduces risk of colorectal cancer, reduces cholesterol levels, stabilizes blood sugar, reduces risk of GI disorder, enhances immune functions, lessens hormonal imbalances. And if you look at the recommended intakes, 14 grams per 1,000 calories, that's about 38 grams for men, 25 for women. I think optimal intakes are more than that, probably at least 40 to 60 a day. But actual intakes, 15 to 17 grams for people eating the standard American diet, and about 40 to 80 for vegans. But Paleolithic intakes ranged from an estimated 70 to 150 grams per day. And so you think, if our ancestors were eating that much fiber, where does fiber come from? Plants. They were eating some plants, for sure. So if you look at fiber in foods, legumes are the most concentrated at 10 to 20 grams per cup, then avocados, grains, berries, and then vegetables and fruits, nuts, and seeds. So coarse plants are the only sources of fiber. There are different types of fiber with unique health benefits. So you want to get a big range of foods to get all of the beneficial types of fiber. The soluble, the insoluble, the fermented, the non-fermentable, and so forth. And the no and low fiber foods are low fiber, refined carbohydrates, fast foods, no fiber, meat, poultry, fish, eggs, dairy product, fat, oil, and sugar. So what about the pre and probiotics? Well, prebiotics are just certain types of fiber that feed the gut bacteria, and polyphenols as well. And they are literally the food for beneficial gut bacteria. And prebiotics help to build and maintain a healthy gut microbiome, which really supports all body systems, blood glucose control, immune function, brain health, all of that. Eating a wide variety of whole plant foods is the most effective way of optimizing intake. And some of the best sources of prebiotics are whole grains, bananas, blueberries, fruits, asparagus, artichokes, even Jerusalem artichokes, onions, garlics, leeks, and all sorts of vegetables, and of course the fibrous seeds as well. And probiotics are actually, so the difference between prebiotics and probiotics, the prebiotics are food for bacteria. The probiotics are bacteria. So they're gut microbes that can help to fortify beneficial bacteria within the gut microbiome. And of course, people often use dairy yogurt as a source of probiotics, but of course, any yogurt that's cultured is a source, but so is tempeh, miso, fermented vegetables, kimchi, kombucha, all of those things. Phytochemicals and antioxidants are from plants, and so predominantly there are some antioxidants in animal products, but mostly phytochemicals and antioxidants are from plants, and they protect against disease and enhance dietary treatment by reducing oxidative stress and inflammation, enhancing gut microbiota, improving fasting glucose and insulin sensitivity, and supporting immune function. They also protect DNA against damage. And to maximize our intake, we want to eat a big variety of plants. We want to go for color. So the richest sources of phytochemicals and antioxidants are often the most colorful. So you could choose purple instead of white onions, black instead of brown rice, dark instead of light greens, for example. You want to eat a whole rainbow of vegetables. I go for at least 3 green, 2 orange yellow, 2 pink red, 1 purple blue, and 1 white beige every day. And I try to make sure my salads have all of the colors in them. You want to pile on the herbs and spices because gram for gram, they're more concentrated in antioxidants than most other foods. Eat more raw foods. And here, raw foods contain enzymes that convert some phytochemicals into their active forms. Like, for example, cruciferous vegetables contain myrosinase, and myrosinase converts glucosinolates to isothiocyanates like sulforaphane. And sulforaphane induces phase 2 enzymes that help detoxify carcinogens in the body. So very, very powerful. Allanase in allium vegetables helps to convert allan to its bioactive metabolite allicin. And we want to start sprouting because when you sprout a seed, you're literally telling the seed to get ready to support the life and growth of a new plant. So all the stored forms of nutrients are released, the anti-nutrients are broken down, and so that the plant can use the nutrients and grow. So also the phytochemical army in that seed just multiplies to protect that new baby plant, and it multiplies by about 5 to 50 times. So adding sprouts is a fantastic way to increase all of those beneficial compounds. Drink antioxidant-rich teas like hibiscus and green teas and all sorts of ginger and turmeric and so forth. And eat whole plant foods. Minimize ultra-processed foods. And so what are ultra-processed foods? Well, ultra-processed foods are industrially processed foods that are made from cheap, highly refined starches like white flour, cornstarch, and other starches, proteins like whey from milk or soy protein isolate, fats like hydrogenated oils, palm oil, shortening, or lard. And to enhance their shelf life, their appearance, and taste, dyes and other color, flavors, artificial sweeteners, stabilizers, bulking agents, defoaming agents, anti-caking agents, emulsifiers, glazing agents, and preservatives are added to make them taste and look like a real food, which they're not. So, and there was just a study that came out in 2024 that showed UPF is directly linked to 32 harmful effects, including mortality, obesity, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, cancer, mental health disorders, and sleep disorders. And the shocking thing is more than 60% of the average American diet is made up of ultra-processed foods. And sometimes it's as high as 80%. So it's quite shocking. Goal number 4 is to minimize pathogenic dietary components like new 5-GC, TMAO, endotoxins, environmental contaminants, and products of high temperature cooking. And new 5-GC is a sialic acid sugar molecule that is not produced by humans but is common in red meat. Human tissues only contain new 5-GC if animal products are eaten. New 5-GC is a pro-inflammatory molecule that is associated with an increased risk of chronic disease. TMAO, or trimethylamine and oxide, is a compound present in some fish, or it's formed when we consume carnitine or choline, which are most concentrated in animal products and dairy products. And the TMO, and it's converted to TMA and then to TMAO, and it's positively associated with inflammation, endothelial dysfunction, type 2 diabetes, central adiposity, hypertension, and cardiovascular disease. And endotoxins are a component of the outer membrane of gram-negative bacteria that are released into the circulation when bacteria die, and they're associated with inflammation and chronic disease risk. And they come from unfriendly bacteria or directly from foods. And diets that are high in saturated fat and animal foods and refined carbohydrates induce endotoxemia. And fiber-rich plant-based diets actually reduce their absorption. So environmental contaminants, these things induce oxidative stress, fuel inflammation, disrupt hormones, damage vital organs, damage DNA, and the most common ones are pesticides in conventional produce, heavy metals like mercury in fish and seafood, arsenic in rice, chicken, fish, and seaweed, and persistent organic pollutants like PCBs and DDTs and dioxin that move up the food chain. So they're mainly in animal products. And the solutions here are to choose organic foods more often, eat lower on the food chain, vary your grains. Inorganic arsenic can increase the risk of type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. And organic rice is just as high in arsenic as conventional rice, and brown rice is probably 1.5 times higher in arsenic than white rice. So choose other grains more often, and if you do use rice, you can cook it in a large amount of water, like 4 to 6 to 10 times more water than rice for 5 minutes. Get rid of the water and then cook it as usual. I mean, you could cook it the whole time in a large amount of water, but you lose more nutrients doing that. That's the way to preserve the nutrients. Products of high temperature cooking like heterocyclic amines, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, acrylamide, and advanced glycation end products are also problematic. And the most concentrated sources for heterocyclic amines, it's only animal products. You need creatine or creatinine to make these things, and that's only in animal products. And so grilled meats are the most concentrated source. Polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons are formed in anything that's blackened. It doesn't matter if it's tofu, anything that's blackened toast will be a source of these compounds. Acrylamide is most concentrated in potato products because potato products are high in asparagine, and asparagine is necessary for the production of acrylamide. And then advanced glycation end products are most concentrated in broiled or cooked processed meat. but they're found in anything that's browned. They're products of the Maillard reaction. So in the health impacts, high temperature cooking produces products of oxidation that increase the risk of cancer and other adverse health outcomes. And there was a study that was just published in 2023 that reported high temperature cooking can damage the DNA of food, possibly damaging the DNA of consumers that eat that food. And it impairs immunity. And of course, animal products are much higher in DNA than plant foods. Solutions here: avoid charred or blackened food, especially meat, poultry, or fish. Avoid fried foods and use moist cooking methods more often. So what to eat? Well, we want to be eating a diet of predominantly whole plant foods. This is not a diet of deprivation. This is a diet of absolutely gorgeous, delicious foods. We want ideally at least 9 servings of vegetables and fruits a day. 3 of legumes, 3 or more of whole grains, but they're more optional. You can use starchy vegetables too. Nuts and seeds, I would say at least a serving a day to provide you with enough healthy fats. And sprinkle it on with generous amounts of herbs and spices. Add in high quality supplements when they're indicated. You need to ensure reliable sources of B12, vitamin D, iodine, and omega-3s. And of course, in pregnancy, a multivitamin. One of the things you can do to help you design a diet that works is to use a food guide like this one that we have in Plant-Powered Protein and Becoming Vegan, or this one that we have in the book Nourish. You know, a healthy vegan lifestyle can benefit human health, but perhaps the most compelling reasons to choose this sort of lifestyle is the benefits that are provided beyond human health. I don't think there's any step that any individual human being can take towards the preservation of this planet that is more effective than choosing a plant-based diet. And if you look at, this study was done, I think it was 2023, yeah. And they looked at the carbon footprint of various diets. Keto diet, and this is kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalents per 1,000 calories. You can see keto at the top, then paleo, then omnivore, then pescatarian, then vegetarian, and at the very bottom, vegan. And compared to vegan diets, the carbon footprint is 4.2 times greater for keto, 3.8 times greater for paleo, and 3.2 times greater for an omnivorous diet compared to a vegan diet. And it's easy to understand why when you look at the carbon footprint of food. Animal products have a much higher carbon footprint than plant foods doing. You can see that, rice is a little bit higher than most of the other foods, more similar to eggs. And of course, choosing a plant-based diet or a vegan diet is more ethically justifiable. We slaughter over 70 billion animals for food every year in the world, and over 90% of those animals are raised in CAPOs, or confined animal feeding operations. And to me, it makes absolutely no sense to cause pain, suffering, and death in other living beings when it's not only unnecessary, but it increases the risk of death and disease in people, and it threatens the very life support systems of this planet. By getting our nutrition from plants, we all win, and we have a choice. When we consider the consequences of our food choices, not just for ourselves, but beyond ourselves, a plant-based diet becomes both an ecological and ethical imperative. And the bottom line is you can change the world, but you must begin with yourself. See the best in others, educate with compassion, share delicious food, and above all, be kind. And many thanks. I'd just like to end with saying thank you to the Northwest Veg for their exceptional work, for hosting this event, for inviting us, and for their work in supporting everyone that's committed to making compassionate, sustainable food choices. So there's some of my books, and thank you very much.